Anthony Albanese has just returned from his third international trip since taking office, and his welcome was not as warm as he might have hoped for.
Back home, straight into a flood disaster. You were on the ground in Sydney yesterday and confronted by a frustrated resident. How did that feel?
Oh, people are frustrated. People in the Richmond Hawkesbury have been through 4 floods in 18 months, and prior to that they were affected by the bushfires. People are incredibly frustrated. It's a really tough time.
That's right. While Albanese has been posing in front of cameras and shaking hands with world leaders, his own country has been hit hard.
Now, I know Angus Taylor has criticised your international travel. The Premier has obviously defended you with that. But can you see how some people might be frustrated, or was there any particular time you thought maybe I should come home a bit earlier?
No, as you know, you were on the trip. No journalists on the trip raised that before I headed into Ukraine, and I did that on Saturday at lunchtime. At that time, there weren't the disaster that evolved in the day after and during the beginning of this week is still unfolding.
Well, fair enough, he was in a war zone, but when you consider that one of Labor's chief complaints against the coalition was that media slogan, Morrison doesn't hold a hose, it seems like Albanese may have spent just a little bit too much time abroad than he should have. One trip that was probably unnecessary was to France to make amends with French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, Macron should have been apologising to our country for allowing the shambles of a now axed submarine deal to get so bad, costing us so much money. We warned the French repeatedly that they were stuffing up the deal and Macron didn't fix it. Instead, he lied about it and bagged our country in an extremely unfair way. The media's contempt for Scott Morrison clouded their judgment on that issue, and they let Macron get away with disrespecting our nation. And now that Morrison is gone, this is how they covered the meeting.
Anthony Albanese given a warm welcome by President Emmanuel Macron, who appeared to put the controversial submarine deal behind him.
We will speak about the future, not the past. He's not responsible of what happened.
Yes, Macron, Albo isn't responsible. You are. And Australia should not be capitulating to such a deceitful bully. However, at least one sane member of the Australian media captured the moment perfectly, and that is our very own Johannes Leek. He's a regular on this program. Johannes pictured our Prime Minister on his knees, puckering up to a pompous Macron. You know this cartoon was brutally effective because former Prime Minister turned Santa Claus impersonator Kevin Rudd tweeted it out in fury. Well, Kevin, we are sorry, but in this country, we are allowed to criticise our leaders. Perhaps you can grow up and get a hobby. So, Caroline, what are your thoughts on Anthony Albanese flying around the world?
Oh, look, I can appreciate why the trip was as long as it was, and there has been quite a number of those international appointments and conferences. I'm actually pretty cool with that. I thought the criticism of the former Prime Minister for being overseas and even going on holiday, I thought that was a bit rough. Everyone's entitled to have a holiday, yes. And if there's international engagements, that should be allowed to occur. For me, there's not really the issue. But I think the Prime Minister, if you're going to be overseas for such a long period of time, then probably don't enforce the London Convention quite so strictly. So there has been a lot of things going on in Australia, not just the floods, but we've had an energy crisis in the eastern states with rolling blackouts. We've had interest rates go up 50 basis points 2 months in a row. So there are people who are really worried about the cost of living. They're really worried about inflation. If you are going to be overseas, then you should probably take some of those domestic issue questions while you're over there. I appreciate that he's got ministers to deal with them, but he is still the leader. And in those sort of circumstances, it was probably appropriate for him to answer some of those questions. It didn't have to be, while you're standing next to a dais with a foreign leader. It could have happened at some other stage when he was on his own with the press pack, but he should have been answering some of those questions if he was going to be away for so long.
Yes, Evan, it's such a good point. He's obviously entitled to, and there is a good argument that he should be out there doing that and letting people know who he is and what he stands for. But it's the hypocrisy of how they attacked Scott Morrison for it. And the other thing that I found very amusing was when he was challenged by our reporter on this in that interview, he said, well, you were on the trip and you didn't tell me that I needed to come home. I mean, why would it be up to the journalists to tell the Prime Minister where he needed to be at any given time?
That's right. I think the whole thing goes to show the double standards of the media. It's one rule for the left and another rule for everyone else. I mean, you only have to hark back to earlier in the year in the previous floods when former Prime Minister Scott Morrison actually had COVID, but you had senators like Murray Watts in flood zones harking on about how the Prime Minister was missing. And you had Labor collateral saying the Prime Minister was missing during those floods when he actually was in isolation. So, of course, the media just wrote that as black and white correct. In terms of, the double standards, you're not seeing any of that, where's Albo in the press gallery. You're not seeing any of that from trending on Twitter from the activist class. So it is a complete double standard. I have no problem with the Prime Minister Albanese going off to international trips, especially his trip to Ukraine. I thought was very important. But it goes to show the media willing to play the activist game.
No, yeah, definitely. It is important stuff as well. And, Penny Wong, full credit to her for what she's been doing in the Pacific. We definitely need to be out there and bringing our story forward to some of these nations.